The city of Seattle was waking slowly that morning, mist rising off the bay like quiet breath, and the world felt heavy with unspoken things. Maya Brooks stood outside the tall glass building of Harrington and Rowe Consulting, her new workplace, gripping her coffee a little tighter than she realized. The building rose like a mirrored monument to success, polished, impressive, intimidating. She had dreamed of reaching a place like this. Every late night, every scholarship essay, every internship where she had to work twice as hard just to be seen half as clearly, had led her here. This wasn't just a job. It was supposed to be the first chapter of her real life, the one she had earned. Maya took a deep breath and stepped inside. The temperature shifted immediately, and it wasn't just the air conditioning. It was the energy. Conversations lowered slightly as she walked through the lobby. Eyes flicked toward her and then quickly away. It wasn't hateful or sharp. It was surprised, curious. It was the kind of look someone gives when they see something they didn't expect to find in a place they believe it doesn't belong. Maya knew that look. It wasn't about the words people said. It was about the silence that hung in the air behind them. Her heels echoed softly on the polished floors as she went up to the open concept office. It was a space with glass walls that made everything visible, but very little was actually transparent. People laughed in soft tones, they traded inside jokes, and moved with the easy confidence of those who know they are already accepted. Her supervisor, a woman named Amanda, greeted her with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So good to have you here," Amanda said, her voice a little too light, a little too polished. "We just love diversity here." That was a phrase Maya had learned long ago. It was a corporate code that often translated to, "You are here to be seen, not heard." Still, Maya held her own smile firmly in place. "I'm excited to contribute," she replied, and she meant it. She always meant it. She had something to prove. Not to them, but to herself. Her desk was neat, her initial assignments were promising, but as the hours bled into days, she started to notice the invisible currents in the office, the ones that moved around her, currents she could feel but could never seem to enter. Project teams would form without her. Conversations would carry on around her, but never to her. There was laughter she was never a part of. There were meetings she wasn't told to attend, at least not until after they had ended, when someone would forward her the notes with a casual message. "Just so you were caught up." She told herself to be patient. She waited for her chance to show them what she could do. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. She worked twice the hours of her colleagues. She delivered flawless work, catching details others missed. She solved problems quietly that others had complained about loudly. She offered ideas that were met with polite nods, only to hear them repeated later by someone else, someone who wasn't her, and suddenly praised as brilliant. It was a familiar, exhausting dance, and she kept moving through it step by step because she had done this before. She was not here to break. She was here to rise. But then came a grey Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sky feels heavy and low. It was the moment when all those quiet, subtle slights sharpened into something unmistakable. A major project, the firm's biggest of the quarter, was being launched. Maya had been the backbone of the preliminary work for weeks. She knew the data inside and out, better than anyone on the team. She had shaped the initial strategy. She had, simply put, earned the lead. Amanda called a team meeting to assign the official roles. Maya's heart beat a steady, hopeful rhythm. This was it. This was her chance. Amanda stood at the front of the room, smiling. "And our lead on this project will be—" She paused, scanning the faces in the room, her smile never wavering, already knowing her choice. Connor. A man who had joined the firm 3 months after. Maya, a man who had asked her twice how to pronounce her name, even after she said it clearly the first time. Connor, who had a habit of presenting her ideas as if they were just floating in the air. belonging to no one until he was the one to speak them. Maya felt something in her chest fold in on itself. It wasn't breaking, but tightening, like a fist forming quietly in the dark. She turned to him and congratulated him. Of course she did, because she knew the unwritten rule: don't show the hurt. Don't give them the satisfaction of calling you emotional. Connor just gave her a small nod of thanks, his eyes already on the presentation screen, not even looking at her. And that was when it happened. Something small, something subtle, but something real. She saw the look. Amanda glanced over at Maya, not with apology, not with conflict, but with certainty. It was a look that said, this is how things were always supposed to be. It was a look that confirmed Maya had been useful up to this point, and would be useful again later, but she would never be central, never the leader, never the face of anything that mattered. Maya walked out of the conference room slowly, calmly. Her breath was steady, but it felt heavy in her lungs. The office buzzed around her, oblivious, bright, and self-satisfied. She reached the hallway window that overlooked the sprawling city. The glass reflected her image back at her, strong, tired, unbroken, but bruised. And she realized this bruising wasn't from an accident. It was by design. In that single reflection, watching herself against the backdrop of the city she'd fought so hard to conquer, something changed. It wasn't a wave of anger. It wasn't a pit of despair. It was resolve. A fire rising quietly, steadily, warmer than rage and sharper than grief. She had come too far to be hidden in the background. She had earned her place here, and she would make them see it. Not by begging for a seat at the table, not by breaking down, but by producing work of such undeniable brilliance that ignoring her would become impossible. The beginning of her fight did not look like shouting. It didn't look like a dramatic confrontation. It looked like a woman standing still, staring at her own reflection, and deciding once and for all that she would not move back another inch. The silence around her had been designed to contain her. But Maya Brooks had not come here to be quiet. She had come here to rise, and the rising began now. Seattle's rain had its own rhythm, soft, steady, patient. It tapped gently against the tall office windows the next morning, as if it already knew what Maya was waking up to. The world didn't change overnight. Not the buildings, not the smiles people used as masks, but something inside her had shifted in a way she could not unshift. The silence she once tolerated had become something she could hear too clearly now. Every slight, every dismissal, every polite erasure. She walked into work with that same calm grace she had trained herself to wear, but inside she was sharper, more alert, watching the way things moved, because once you notice a pattern, you cannot unsee it. The office buzzed with a false harmony that morning. Connor stood near the coffee station, explaining her strategy to a group of associates, as if the ideas had arrived in his head fully formed. His voice carried confidence, authority, ownership. The group around him nodded eagerly, laughing at his jokes, admiring how effortlessly he explained things that had taken her weeks of late nights and exhaustion to shape. Maya didn't interrupt. She didn't correct him publicly. She didn't need to. She just watched, observed, collected. The moment would come. Good strategists always waited for the right moment. She sat at her desk and opened her files, but her hands paused before touching the keyboard. Her supervisor's voice echoed in her memory. "We just love diversity here." The way she said it, like decor, like a seasonal design choice. But if they valued appearance, Maya realized, then that appearance held power too. She didn't need to fight with volume. She needed to learn the room, learn the game, learn the cracks in the foundation. And she did. She began staying after work, not to fix mistakes or catch up, but to watch how decisions traveled through the building, who really held influence, which compliments were real and which were currency being traded. She noticed how the office managers talked to the directors when they thought no one was listening, how Amanda's tone changed drastically around certain executives, how Connor stumbled when any question moved beyond what Maya had already explained to him. A workplace was never just a workplace. It was an ecosystem, a network of power, reputation, perception, and whispers that shaped everything. And Maya had always been good at reading what went unsaid. One evening, nearly everyone had gone home except the cleaning staff. The building hummed with the low electricity of silence. Maya sat alone in the glass conference room, the city lights reflecting around her like distant constellations. She was reviewing final projections for the project, her project, when one of the janitors, an older black woman with gentle eyes and a tired back, paused near the door. "You're always here late," she said with a soft, knowing tone. Maya smiled faintly. "Just trying to make sure things are right." The woman nodded slowly, like she understood more than she spoke. "They ever tell you how good you're doing, or they just take what you give and act like it was theirs all along?" The question wasn't accidental. Maya's breath caught, not because the woman asked it, but because someone finally saw her. "No," Maya whispered. "They don't tell me anything." The woman leaned her hand against the doorframe. Baby. I worked in offices like this for 30 years. Same money, same walls, different faces, but same cold heart behind them. They don't get softer, you do." A silence stretched, deep, honest, heavy. "But you," the woman continued, "you don't look like someone who came here to shrink." Maya felt that. Deep. She didn't know this woman's name, yet she had said the one thing no one had ever said to her. "I see you." "Thank you," Maya said quietly. "Really?" The woman nodded again, as if passing a torch. "Just remember, don't let them convince you that your light is a problem. They only squint when it's too bright." She rolled her cleaning cart down the hall, leaving Maya sitting in a glow that wasn't from the city lights anymore. The next morning, Maya woke with something new inside her, not anger, direction. When she stepped into the office, Connor was preparing to present her strategies to the senior board for the first time. This was the presentation that would determine leadership roles, promotions, bonuses, the future. He looked confident. But confidence meant nothing when the foundation was borrowed. Maya approached him calmly. "Before you go in," she said softly, "remember the cross-market retention model on slide 6. You reverse the percentages. If you present it that way, the projection collapses." Connor blinked, stared. Panic flashed behind his eyes. You'll fix it, right?" he asked. "No," she replied. Her voice was serene, solid, unshakable. "I already fixed it in the original files, but you switched my slides for your version, so you'll need to make sure you understand the method before you speak on it." His throat tightened. Maya walked away before he could respond. Not triumphant, not smug, just done being small. When the presentation started, the executives sat around the long glass table. Amanda smiled politely. Connor cleared his throat. The slides flickered to life, and Maya sat quietly in the back of the room, watching. If he stumbled alone. If he tried to speak her work into his voice, the truth would show. The office had taught her something important. They weren't afraid of her failing. They were afraid of her being seen succeeding. For the first time, Maya understood her power, and she no longer intended to let them hide it. The boardroom felt colder that morning, even though sunlight poured through the tall windows, scattering across the polished table like liquid gold. The executives sat in their high-backed chairs, expressions calm, pens aligned neatly in front of them. The way people arrange things when they care more about appearances than substance. The air smelled of citrus polish and expensive coffee, but underneath it all there was something sharper, something metallic. It was the scent of anticipation waiting to become consequence. I sat near the back, quiet, observant, steady. I wasn't hiding, I was simply watching. This boardroom had always been a stage where I was never invited to speak, even though my work was the very script everyone followed. Today, however, the script wasn't memorized, and the actor performing it hadn't studied the role. Connor stood at the front, a remote in his slightly shaking hand, his smile stretched too tight. It was the smile of someone who had gotten used to taking shortcuts and was just now realizing the shortcut ended at a locked door, and he didn't have the key. He cleared his throat once, then again. He began to speak, repeating lines I had once explained to him over coffee cups and open laptops, over late-night messages, during moments when I believed that mentoring and collaborating meant rising together. Now I saw it clearly. In some rooms, collaboration is treated as free labor, and mentorship is seen as something owed, but never acknowledged. The first 3 slides went smoothly. They were well rehearsed, memorized, familiar. He exhaled, thinking he had the room in the palm of his hand. Then came slide 6. The numbers stared back at him, and the confidence bled from his face like color from a watercolor left in the rain. The retention model was wrong. Not just slightly wrong, completely, fundamentally off. The kind of wrong that doesn't just weaken a proposal, but shatters its entire credibility. One of the board members, a man named Mr. Harrison, leaned forward. His voice was calm, but cut through the room. "Would you walk us through how you arrived at these projections?" Connor swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward me for a fraction of a second, a flicker of pure desperation in his pupils. I didn't move. I just held his gaze. He looked back at the slide, and the silence stretched into something almost physical, a weight pressing down on the room, suffocating the air. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Well, the model here is based on a comparative market trend evaluation across multiple sectors tied to regional performance metrics." The words were just air, weightless, shapeless, meaningless. The executives exchanged glances. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was a clear signal that something was shifting. Something was being revealed. Amanda, sitting closest to Connor, tried to throw him a lifeline, her tone gentle, pretending not to be condescending. "Perhaps Maya can clarify. She worked on this project closely, didn't she?" And just like that, the entire room turned toward me as one. It was the first moment I had ever truly been seen in that space, not as support, not as a shadow, but as the source. I stood slowly, without hesitation, without shrinking. My voice was calm, but it carried the unmistakable warmth of ownership, as if every word had been shaped by my late nights and relentless effort. "The original model," I began, "uses predictive analytics tied to trend-based cohort tracking across demographic markets. It accounts for fluctuation, but it also considers behavior-based product loyalty indicators. When the model was adjusted manually, the projection inverted, causing the data to collapse. My tone remained even, balanced, factual. The correct version is documented. I can share it if the board would like to review." Silence answered me, but it was a different silence than before. This one was filled with awareness, awareness of my mind, my presence, my foundation. One of the senior executives nodded slowly. "Yes, please present your original version." Connor sank into his seat, his hands trembling now, realizing that his moment of performance had become his moment of exposure. He wasn't brought down by an attack or a conflict. He was brought down by the truth. Truth is quiet, but it is undeniable. I connected my laptop, projected my original work, and walked the room through my reasoning. I wasn't trying to impress anyone or prove a point. I was simply showing my work, stating the facts, existing fully in my expertise. My voice never wavered, my gestures were minimal, my expression was composed, but my energy, my certainty, filled the room in a way no one could ignore. When I finished, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was recognition, not applause, not even admiration. It was something deeper, something earned. The board started asking questions, real questions, complex strategic questions, and I answered every single one with a clarity that made the path forward obvious. When the presentation ended, the executives began murmuring among themselves. Not about Connor anymore, they were talking about me, about the possibility of future leadership, about capability, about restructuring the team to ensure better alignment. Connor wouldn't look at me. Amanda avoided eye contact completely, but the senior director, sitting at the head of the table, leaned back slowly and studied me, the way you might study a bridge you didn't realize was holding the entire city together. "Maya," he said, his voice thoughtful even. "I'd like to schedule a conversation with you later this week to discuss your trajectory here. It's clear we need to re-examine some assumptions regarding contributions and leadership." And there it was. Not victory, not revenge, just truth, finally stepping into the daylight. The meeting ended. Chairs scraped back softly, voices mixed in low tones, and footsteps moved down the hallway. I walked out calmly, not rushing, not glowing with triumph, simply present in my own space for the first time in a long time. I passed the glass wall of the conference room and saw my reflection looking back at me. I didn't look different, but I felt different. I didn't feel like someone who had finally been given permission to exist. I felt like someone who had learned she never needed permission in the first place. When I got back to my desk, a small notification popped up on my screen. It was a message from Eleanor, the older woman who cleaned the office in the evenings. She had left a lunchroom napkin on my desk earlier. On it, written in pen, in a handwriting that carried years of experience and care, were 5 simple words. "They saw you today, remember." I smiled, a slow, quiet smile that stays in your heart, not just on your lips, because the war wasn't over, but the silence had finally ended. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd like, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation. The next morning, the office felt different. The air was thick with a quiet tension, the kind that settles when a long-held secret is finally spoken aloud. People didn't look at me directly, but I could feel their eyes drifting my way. It wasn't admiration, it was awareness, and awareness changes everything. When people are forced to see someone they were trained to overlook, the entire balance of a room shifts. Connor came in late. His hair was a mess, his tie was crooked. The polished confidence he usually wore was cracked, like a vase that had been dropped and glued back together. He didn't speak to me, he didn't have to. The silence between us screamed what neither of us wanted to admit. The illusion he had built his career on was gone. The truth he tried to bury was now standing on its own. The whispers started, of course, but they didn't bother me as much as I thought they would. I had lived through the much louder dismissal of my own self-doubt. Quiet gossip was nothing in comparison. But here's something I learned. Confidence isn't a shield. It's not armor that stops the world from pushing back against you. It's something more delicate. It simply holds you upright while the world does its pushing. By the end of the week, the senior director called me into his office. It was a room of glass and open space, with framed awards lining the walls like silent witnesses to ambition. He didn't rush his words. He didn't offer fake flattery. He just studied me with the thoughtful weight of someone making a decision that would ripple out far beyond that single moment. "You've shown clarity of vision," he began, his voice even, "and that matters here. Leadership isn't just about who speaks the loudest, it's about who sees the furthest." I just listened, my breathing steady. I didn't fidget or shrink. I just waited, not as someone desperate for approval, but as someone ready for clarity. "We'd like to create a new strategist role," he continued, "one that reflects the work you've already been doing unofficially. This would come with a title change and a significant compensation adjustment. The words hung in the air: recognition, visibility, responsibility, power. But power always comes with a cost. I could feel it in the hesitation that followed. He leaned back slightly. However, changes like this can cause disruption, and I need to ask something of you. For the sake of stability, diplomacy, and team continuity. There it was, the price. I'd like you to avoid public conflict regarding the presentation, he said. Let the transition appear natural. Let the narrative be that you're stepping into new responsibilities rather than correcting previous failures. In other words, don't expose what happened. Don't name what was stolen from you. Don't disturb the comfort of those who benefited from your silence. I understood. I always had. Organizations don't fear mistakes. They fear accountability. They don't fear talent. They fear disruption to the hierarchy. I nodded slowly, my eyes locked on his. I have no interest in fighting. I just want the work to speak clearly. His expression softened, not with kindness, but with something far more valuable. Real respect, the kind that isn't given freely, but earned through quiet, relentless persistence. Then we're aligned, he said. The promotion was approved that Monday. The announcement was short, efficient, sanitized. It simply said I was being elevated to lead strategy for the department. No mention of my overlooked contributions, no acknowledgement of my work being stolen, no apology. But true recognition doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives in the undeniable shift of who people look to when they need answers. And slowly they began looking to me, not because they wanted to, but because they could no longer deny where the answers came from. While some doors opened, others closed. Connor avoided me completely now. His pride had fractured into a bitter resentment. There's no pain, quite like realizing the person you underestimated is now holding the future you thought was yours. Amanda tried to be friendly again, making small talk in the hallways. But her warmth felt thin, like cheap wrapping paper over an unresolved issue. She laughed too brightly, complimented too quickly. She wanted peace, but peace built on avoidance is just silence pretending to be healing. I didn't return hostility with hostility. I just did what I had always done. I worked, I listened, I contributed. But I also learned to protect my time. I learned to protect my work. I learned to protect my worth. And that right there changes everything. Outside of work, the change was visible too. My mother saw it first, not in my job title, but in my posture. She said my shoulders no longer carried an invisible weight. My grandmother heard it in my voice. It was steadier, more rooted. Even strangers seem to feel it, but growth is rarely quiet forever. Recognition draws attention, and attention draws challenges. One evening, as I was packing up to leave, I found a note on my desk. No name, no signature, just 6 words printed in sharp, angry letters. You don't deserve what you got. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the sentiment wasn't. For a moment I just stared at it, but I didn't crumble. I didn't break. I simply folded the note, placed it in my bag, and walked out of the office. Because I finally knew the truth. Being seen doesn't protect you. Being seen demands that you decide over and over again who you are, especially when others are trying to decide for you. And I had a feeling the world wasn't finished testing that decision just yet. Thanks so much for watching and sharing this journey with me. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's continue the story. The weeks that followed unfolded slowly, like a season changing 1 degree at a time. It was so gradual that most people wouldn't have noticed, but Maya felt the shift in every room she walked into. Because once power has moved, it does not settle quietly. With her new role came visibility, and visibility in corporate spaces is never neutral. People began watching her not just with curiosity, but with calculation. They evaluated her presence, her tone, her decisions. They were measuring her not against who she used to be, but against what she represented now. And representation carries weight, a weight that doesn't just disappear simply because you grow strong enough to lift it. Her work expanded, meetings multiplied, strategy discussions stretched late into the evenings, and she found herself in rooms she had once only passed by. She was observing conversations that once happened above her, but now her own voice was shaping them. Yet even with this new recognition, she never took ownership of the victory with arrogance. She moved carefully, like someone constantly aware of the floor beneath her, because she understood that gaining space is not the same as being welcomed into it. For a little while, it seemed possible that a new equilibrium might form, a balance where respect could finally replace the old patterns of erasure. But institutions don't change just because one person becomes visible. They only change when the structures that depend on silence begin to break. And silence, it seemed, was not done trying to reclaim her. One late afternoon, the office was quiet. Most of the staff had already gone, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the muted echo of distant keyboards. She was reviewing the performance metrics for a new client strategy when the conference room door opened and Connor walked in. He didn't knock, didn't clear his throat. He just entered like someone who still believed the room belonged to him. His face was composed, but his eyes carried something sharp and unsettled, a flame of something that could easily become resentment if left without direction. He stood there silently at first, as though his words needed to gather themselves before appearing. Finally he spoke, his voice controlled, but edged with something raw. He said he wanted to talk. Not about the past, he insisted, but about the future. But every sentence he formed just circled back to the same wound. He felt replaced. He felt overlooked. He felt the narrative had shifted in a way that painted him as something he didn't want to be. She listened, not because she owed him understanding, but because she knew understanding is not the same as acceptance. And as he spoke, she realized he wasn't apologizing. He wasn't reflecting on his actions. He was seeking reassurance that the world still centered him. When he finally asked her if she could speak to leadership on his behalf, to soften things, to help him regain the image he believed he deserved, the truth hit her with painful clarity. He didn't want fairness to be restored. He only wanted his advantage back. She spoke calmly, evenly. She told him that accountability was not cruelty, that growth required facing yourself rather than running from the consequences. She said that if he truly wanted to move forward, he would have to do so without her enabling the narrative that harm never occurred. His face hardened at her words. His pride recoiled. He left without another word, and the door closing behind him felt final. But the aftermath was not. The following week, the whispers began again. This time, they weren't quiet or hesitant. They were sharpened with intention. Rumors were seeded carefully, placed in conversations where they could be overheard, framed as concern but designed to undermine. Comments about her being too ambitious, too assertive, hard to work with, creating tension, changing the culture. These are the kinds of accusations that don't need evidence to be dangerous, because they rely on centuries of scripts already written into the minds of those who benefit from them. She felt the shift before anyone said anything directly to her. The friendly greetings in the hallway became shorter. Invitations to informal gatherings grew fewer. The temperature of rooms cooled even when the air remained warm. And as always, the burden of naming the dynamic fell on the one experiencing it. One evening, while sitting with her grandmother at the kitchen table, steam rising gently from the herbal tea between them, Maya spoke about the weight returning. She described the feeling of being watched again, not as a leader, but as a threat. Her grandmother listened quietly, her hands resting gently around her cup, her expression calm but knowing. There are moments in life when wisdom arrives not as instruction, but as memory. Her grandmother shared a story from her own youth, of working in a sewing factory where her skill had been recognized, but her presence was resented. She explained how she learned that sometimes, when people can't diminish your ability, they try to diminish your character instead. She leaned forward just slightly, her voice soft, steady, and full of history. "You must choose carefully what you respond to," she said. "Not every conflict deserves your voice, but every truth deserves your protection." Those words settled into Maya like roots finding soil. The next day at work she moved differently, not withdrawn, not defensive, simply grounded. When colleagues asked leading questions meant to trigger her insecurity, she responded with clarity and focus. When strategy discussions hinted at excluding her, she asserted her knowledge without apology. She didn't match their hostility. She didn't return the tension. She simply remained present in her full, rightful place. This made her presence even harder to ignore, and that quietly drew allies to her. It started with small moments, a colleague volunteering to support her project, a junior analyst asking to be mentored by her, a senior engineer requesting her input on high-level planning. People who had been silent before now saw her clearly, not as a challenge, but as a leader. And then, unexpectedly, the senior director called her into his office again. This time, his expression was more thoughtful than administrative, his tone less formal, more deliberate. He told her the board had reviewed her strategic work and wanted her to represent the company in an upcoming cross-organizational initiative, one that would influence policy and direction far beyond their department. It was an opportunity not given lightly, but more than that, it was an acknowledgement that wasn't tied to her silence. It was tied to her work, her clarity, her leadership, her impact. She accepted, not because she needed validation, but because she was ready to take up space fully now, without apology, without shrinking, without question. As she left the office that evening, the sky was streaked with the soft violet gray of a Seattle dusk. The streetlights began to glow as the city exhaled into the night. She walked slowly, breathing deeply, her steps steady on the pavement. She no longer carried that old weight in her shoulders. She carried something stronger, the knowledge that she had not simply endured. She had transformed, and transformation, once it begins, does not end quietly. It continues, it expands, it becomes. She was not done. She was only beginning. The invitation to represent the company on the cross-organizational initiative came with a public announcement, a company-wide email that arrived early Monday morning. It moved through the office like a quiet ripple, one that gathered force as it spread. Not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The words were formal and polished, acknowledging her strategic contributions and highlighting her new leadership direction. And though it was written in that neutral tone corporate language always insists on, its meaning was crystal clear. Maya was no longer someone who could be ignored, bypassed, or worked around. Recognition, however, doesn't resolve resentment. It reveals it. The office hummed with a new tension, colder this time, not sharp like an accusation, but lingering like a fog that refuses to lift. Some colleagues congratulated her, their smiles warm and sincere, their eyes steady and real. But others offered shallow compliments wrapped in the thin plastic of forced enthusiasm, their expressions betraying the conflict beneath, the disbelief that she had become someone the company would choose to elevate rather than merely tolerate. But it was Connor's reaction that shifted the temperature of every room. He didn't speak to her, didn't congratulate her, didn't acknowledge the announcement at all. Instead, he worked with a quiet, simmering precision, constructing a narrative just beneath the surface. He framed her advancement not as earned or deserved, but as political, identity-driven, performative. He would position himself in conversations as the reasonable professional, concerned about cultural imbalance, about favoritism, about standards. And because he framed his concerns in such careful language, with no direct accusations, only questions and implications, his story traveled faster than the truth. He understood the power of tone, the power of a hint. He understood how narratives about black women are often shaped long before they ever get to speak. But what he didn't understand was that this time, Maya was no longer standing alone. The first sign of this shift appeared during a large department-wide presentation, a routine strategy overview that had suddenly become loaded with scrutiny. Maya stood at the front of the room, speaking clearly and confidently, walking the leadership team through the upcoming initiative. Her voice was steady, her movements controlled, her focus precise. Halfway through her presentation, Connor interrupted her, not with a question, not for clarification. He interrupted with a correction framed as courteous, but designed to undercut her authority. He claimed her projection model was incomplete, that a data point she referenced didn't align with the internal archive, and he spoke with the polished calm of someone who believed the room would automatically trust him over her. The room held its breath. Maya felt a familiar ache rise in her chest. Not fear, not doubt, but recognition. It was the moment she had seen countless times in countless spaces when the work of a black woman is questioned, not because it's flawed, but because someone believes she should have to prove herself twice just to speak once. There was a time when she would have shrunk. She would have smoothed her tone, apologized to maintain ease in the room. But that version of her was gone, shed like old skin that could no longer hold the person she had become. She inhaled slowly, then turned toward him, her voice calm and steady, each word measured not with anger, but with unwavering clarity. The archive was updated last quarter. Your reference point is from 6 months earlier. Here, she said, tapping a key and pulling up the corrected data set with precise efficiency, is the verified model. Silence slid through the room like a slow wave. Then something subtle happened, something small but powerful. 2 colleagues nodded. One murmured, "That's correct." The senior director leaned back in his chair with an expression that carried no surprise, only confirmation. The authority in the room had shifted. Connor's expression didn't falter entirely, but something behind his eyes cracked. A fracture of certainty, a realization that his influence no longer held the weight it once did. The meeting continued, but the balance was changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Afterward, people approached Maya not with forced politeness, but with genuine acknowledgement, the kind that comes when someone witnesses truth instead of just hearing a rumor. And though she received their words with grace, she also understood the deeper shift that was occurring. Power was no longer theoretical. Power was now visible, but visibility has a cost. That evening, when she returned home, she found her grandmother waiting at the kitchen table again, as if sensing that something had shifted in the air around Maya. They sat together quietly for a moment, no words exchanged, just presence, just memory breathing softly between them. Finally, Maya spoke. Not about the confrontation, not about the recognition, but about the weight of holding herself at full height in rooms that were never built for her to stand tall in. She spoke of the exhaustion that comes not from doing the work, but from carrying the knowledge that others are waiting for her to fail. Her voice didn't shake, but it held something heavy, something long buried. Her grandmother listened, her expression soft and sure, the way only someone who has lived through storm after storm can listen, without fear of the thunder. She reached across the table, resting her hand over Maya's gently, grounding her with touch instead of instruction. "Baby," she said, her voice warm and full of memory, "you are not walking into those rooms by yourself. You walk with every woman who had to hold her tongue, every woman who had to watch her work be taken and still show up the next morning. You carry more than your own story, but you do not carry it alone." The words didn't erase the exhaustion. They honored it. And honoring something is the first step in healing it. Days passed. The project moved forward, meetings continued, decisions were made, and progress unfolded. But beneath the visible progress, something else was building. A shift, a reckoning, a moment waiting to arrive. It happened on a Thursday. A storm had rolled in over the city, dark clouds pressing low over the skyline, rain streaking hard against the office windows. The kind of storm that turns daylight into dusk. The senior leadership team gathered for a quarterly review with external partners, a high-level meeting where performance and strategy were scrutinized in ways that could shift entire careers. Maya was presenting. Connor was in attendance. The room was full of executives with long titles, sharp eyes, and quiet power, and on that day, Maya did not just speak. She led. She guided the discussion with clarity and expertise, addressing concerns with thoughtful precision, demonstrating not just knowledge but vision, not just analysis but understanding. Her presence wasn't loud or forceful, it was grounded, unshakable, undeniable. Near the end of the meeting, one of the external partners asked a difficult question, one that required not only data but narrative understanding. Before Maya could answer, Connor leaned forward, prepared once again to resume his place as the voice of authority. But the senior director spoke first. Maya should answer. The room turned toward her, and in that moment, something shifted permanently. Not because she spoke, but because the room was finally ready to listen. Her voice moved evenly through the quiet, steady and confident, shaping the conversation with depth and ease. And when she finished, the partner nodded, visibly impressed, genuinely engaged. The moment didn't feel triumphant. It felt true. The meeting ended. People began to gather their papers, and Connor remained seated, staring at the table, his shoulders slightly slumped, his expression unreadable. The realization he had avoided for months now sat fully before him, silent but impossible to escape. Whatever narrative he had tried to build, whatever quiet campaign he had believed would restore his standing, had failed. Because truth, when spoken consistently, when lived fully, becomes undeniable. Maya left the room quietly, her step steady, her breath deep. She was not celebrating, she was not relieved, she was simply ready. Because there was one conversation left to have. One final moment of clarity, one more thread to close before the story could move forward. Tomorrow she would speak to him directly, not to confront, not to accuse, but to release. Because ending a struggle isn't about winning. It's about choosing peace over the burden of being right, and she was ready for that now. Morning light filtered into the office the next day, soft and pale, casting long shadows across the floor. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean, the sky a quiet blue that felt like a deep breath after days of holding tension. Have you ever felt that calm after a storm, not just in the weather, but in your life? That moment when the chaos subsides and all that's left is a quiet, profound clarity. That's where our story finds Maya today. She walked with steady steps, not hurried, not hesitant, simply present. Her heart was calm. This wasn't because the journey had been easy, or because her struggle had been neatly resolved. No, it was because she understood something powerful now. Peace doesn't arrive when the world around you changes. Peace arrives when you choose your place within it. It's a choice we make, not a gift we're given, and that choice changes everything. She found Connor in the small conference room overlooking the courtyard. It was the same room where so many early project discussions had once taken place, back when there was no conflict, only ambition and possibility. Funny how a space can hold so many different memories, isn't it? He looked up when she entered. The expression on his face was different this time, not defensive, not calculating, not even charming. It was just tired. A quiet exhaustion that comes when a story one has been telling to others, and especially to oneself, no longer holds. She sat across from him. This wasn't a power play. They were just two people who had crossed paths in ways neither fully understood at the time. There was no anger left in her eyes. Anger had burned away long ago, like a wildfire that clears the forest floor for new growth. What remained was a crystal-clear understanding. She spoke first, her voice steady, not sharp, not soft, but perfectly balanced. "I want you to know," she said, "that I see the work you put into what you do. I always did. This was never about who was more capable or more deserving. It was about the space we were each allowed to occupy." He exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had held too tightly for far too long. "I never meant to make this personal," he said. The words were quiet, sincere enough to be believed, but not enough to excuse the harm. And that's a crucial distinction, isn't it? Intention versus impact. "I know," she replied calmly, "but intention does not erase impact." And the impact was real. The truth of those words hung in the air, not as an accusation, but as a simple, undeniable fact. He nodded. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was honest. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, not of defeat, but of understanding. And sometimes that's all we need. Maya didn't need an apology to heal. She had already done that hard work herself. But acknowledgement is what allows the wound to finally close. It's the permission you give yourself to move on, validated and whole. They spoke for a few minutes more, not to rewrite the past, but to release it. And when she stood to leave, there was no triumph in her steps, only lightness. The weight she had been carrying was not her burden anymore. She had set it down. Outside that room, the office had begun to shift in ways both quiet and meaningful. Her team started asking for her perspective, not as a token gesture, but because they valued her leadership. Conversations that once required her to armor up and guard her voice now welcomed it with open arms. Meetings felt different, not necessarily easier, but more honest. And honesty, she was learning, was its own kind of freedom. The cross-organizational initiative launched within weeks, and Maya led the project. She did it with the calm assurance of someone who had reclaimed her own narrative. She wasn't just managing tasks, she was guiding discussions across departments, balancing conflict with genuine listening, and making decisions with both clarity and empathy. She didn't strive for perfection anymore. She aimed for integrity, and people responded to that, some with admiration, some with respect, and some, perhaps most importantly, with the simple recognition of a strength they could no longer dismiss. One evening, months later, as the first phase of the project successfully closed, Maya returned home. She found herself in her grandmother's kitchen, that warm, familiar, steady place. The kettle was humming softly on the stove, and the room was filled with the comforting scent of herbs and memory. Her grandmother sat in her usual chair, a silent, knowing presence. Maya told her everything that had happened, not with the urgency of pain this time, but with the ease of reflection. She spoke of it the way you speak of storms that have passed but have forever shaped the shoreline. Her grandmother listened, her eyes warm, her hands folded around her teacup. When Maya finished, a smile spread across her grandmother's face, the kind of smile that holds decades of wisdom and history inside it. "You stood," she said simply, "and when a woman stands where she was told to bend, the world remembers." Those words settled inside Maya like truth returning home. They clicked into place, making sense of the entire journey. Outside, the evening sky deepened, streaked with soft gold and quiet blue. The world was still imperfect. Maya knew there would be new challenges, new rooms to enter, new storms to weather, but she no longer moved through them uncertain of herself. She had learned something profound, something that had been inside her all along. Her voice was not something she had to earn. Her dignity was not something she had to constantly protect. Her presence was not something she had to apologize for. She was enough. Not because they finally said so, but because she finally truly knew so, and that knowing, that deep, unshakable self-acceptance, that was the beginning of everything still to come. Thank you for walking this journey with us today. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content that explores the strength within. We'll see you next time.